everyone, welcome to yet another episode. This is Unpack show with Anand. Today's topic is interesting topic. I've been looking forward to this discussion. So the topic for today is unpacking building courageous cultures. What does that mean? Courageous cultures don't just happen by luck. They are built over time through steady leadership, honest conversation, and a real willingness to face uncomfortable truths, right? That is hard for any leaders to face with. So they grow when leaders create space for people to speak up, share ideas, and even challenge decisions. Not to criticize, but to make things better. In this episode, we're going to unpack how organization can move from a fear and silence to openness and trust, where people will feel safe to question the status quo, take bold risks, and stand up for what is right. Again, there's a balance between the challenge and empowerment. There's a balance between fear and a fearless culture. So we're going to unpack all of those things. But because progress doesn't come from playing it safe, it comes from brave conversation, thoughtful disagreement, and a shared belief that we are stronger when every voice is heard. So I have a guest with me. I will turn it over to the guest to introduce, and then we'll jump over into the topic. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. So I think as far as introductions, I'll go way back. I would say my story begins with a big leap of faith. And I actually moved to America at the age of 20 with one suitcase and a small amount of savings in my pocket and a Scottish accent so thick that when I interviewed for my first job, they literally didn't understand a word I was saying. But that first job started a chain of events that led to the career that I'm in right now. And I was actually first hired by someone who about 5 years later invited me to help her set up an office products company, that was in 2001. And that's when Innovative was born. And I've been there for the 24 years since. So that little office products company that we started 24 years ago with a handful of people now has 300 employees. We've acquired 14 other companies, and we offer now 6 very different product categories that power modern workplaces. My role in the organization began as, I think we called it VP of Operations, which in a small entrepreneurial business pretty much means do anything that you need to do to set up and build a business. As we grew and expanded our leadership team, I focused a lot more on our technology, marketing, and some other areas. And then recently I took on a division president role. So I've been involved in almost every aspect of the business. But I think to sum up my introduction, I think what I get passion for in life is making visionaries successful, and the person that kind of takes, what if we could do this, and turns it into, okay, here's how we actually do that. So beyond that, I'm a husband, I'm a father of 2 girls, and very into fitness and wellness. We'll call that aging well, and a bit of a personal development junkie.
Thanks for that introduction. It was a great introduction. Thanks for sharing that story. When you came here in 20 and you're looking for the first job, I can relate to myself a little bit. So going back to the topic, Jason, courage in business is not always about taking big risks or making dramatic moves, right? We all know that. Sometimes it is much quieter than that. Often it shows up in those tough conversation, uncomfortable conversation, most importantly, right? That most of the people try to avoid those things, right? But it could be giving honest feedback to a peer or calling out a behavior that doesn't align with the team's value. I've seen people talking about the courageous thing that they did was not about launching a product, not about restructuring a team or restructuring an org. It was about sitting down with someone he respected deeply and saying, okay, hey, we need to talk about how our communication is hurting the team, right? It was not that easy. But it changed the relationship and set a tone for honest conversation across the organization. So when you think about courage in your own world, I think you have an interesting journey beyond the headlines or beyond the big business decisions. What does a courageous culture mean to you personally?
You hit the nail on the head. It sounds like a dramatic big thing, and people talk about it as this big headline of courageous culture, and it really is the thing that is created in the small moments, where in the most simplistic way, I would say, is when you show up as a real person. Again, that sounds overly simplistic, but I've come to realize and I've had this experience myself as I've grown up in a business that's gotten larger and larger and larger. And you feel this tremendous pressure to perform and show up and almost put on masks to say, well, now we're a $200 million company. This is how I have to show up. And there's a temptation to kind of take on this persona where you become further and further from who you really are. And when I reflect back on my career, I had the wonderful opportunity to have what I would call courageous culture, what we're talking about today. I had that modeled to me through the person that I work with, my boss and my mentor for 27 years, modeled that in a way that I didn't actually realize that's what it was until now that I reflect back and I see I got a masterclass in humility, authenticity, caring about relationships and people in a way that actually created a courageous culture. It's what people call it today. I watched it for decades.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to look back and try to unpack what were the components that led us there. And again, I think it's taking a step back, being willing to be yourself and not wear masks and play a role and actually just have honest conversations. I think you referenced that. It reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday. I was on a mentoring call with someone and they asked me a very difficult question, a very vulnerable question that they wanted to ask of me. And it was a difficult question for them to ask. It was a difficult question for me to receive. And I think often in business, when we receive questions like that, we can get very defensive, start playing defense. And I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to actually explore this topic. And we had a great conversation. And I got a text afterwards saying that was one of the best mentoring conversations I ever had.
Nice.
And I reflected and I thought, why is that? And the fact was, I just honestly said, okay, this is a tough topic for me to talk about. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's not run from it.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up having a great conversation where we both walked away with some great insights.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a person of reflection too.
I think it's willing to just show up and, as you said, have those tough conversations and don't fake it. Just have your natural response. Yeah. Be open.
Correct. That makes it so real. So as you were walking through that scenario, like, where she was hesitant to talk about this, but eventually she ended up in talking with you. But I think this is the scenario in most of the workplaces. Like, people want to speak up, but they want to share ideas, raise concerns, or challenge something that doesn't feel right? That's always the people feeling. I've been in those situations in the beginning of my career, even now at sometimes, right? But often they hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they're worried that, about how it might be received or whether it is really safe to be honest and whatnot, right? There's a lot of talk about creating psychological safety. This is what I talked about, like, how do we balance this empowerment and challenging things, right? Not to make people fear about everything that we are questioning, right? That's the sense that you can speak openly without fear of judgment or backlash is such a big part of building courageous culture, right? Yeah. I was talking to someone recently, and he made an interesting point, like, just try this one thing, right? Before you end the meeting, ask this one question: what is that I'm not seeing? And then sit quietly and listen what the team has to say, right? Whether it is a decision that you need to make or whether it's a team staff meeting, it doesn't matter what meeting. Let the flow go as per the agenda. And then the end of the meeting, just ask this one question, like, what is it I'm not seeing, guys, which I should be aware of, right? And sit quietly and listen. To me, I think that will change a lot of the mindset and a lot of behavioral things that we want to change, right? And which will lead to building courageous culture. But I'm curious to know from your experience, I think you're going through this on a daily basis. Have you seen great leaders create that kind of safety, or what are some of the tips and tricks to have this constructive challenge, constructive conversations?
Yeah, so your example about ending a meeting with that question, I think, is important. However, I think you can ask that question, but if you haven't created the environment where that question could be answered honestly, then you didn't do the pre-work to get to the effective answer to that question. And I think that's where the magic lives, is have you created a space where when you ask that question, people feel free to bring forth everything that they want to say and that it's comfortable for them to do so. And it's interesting because I made an observation recently. I was just actually talking with someone else about this. I had 3 meetings in a row external to the company where I showed up to those meetings, and part of the opening was, this is a safe place. We want you to show up as your authentic self, and we are gathering here today for community. And those things struck me because I'm outside of my organization. These are people from many companies coming together. And I thought, why is it we need to say that? Why does that have to be the preface that we have to declare those things? Can't we just naturally have that in our company? And again, to go back to what I said before, I think I received a masterclass in the creation of that. And so now when people are talking about psychological safety and courageous cultures, they're naming things I got to live. And so when I think about how was that created, at the end of the day, the leader has to model the behavior. I got to watch that firsthand. I emulated it. And part of that is, I think, understanding that vulnerability, again, another hot button word these days, but vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a strength. And that the real secret to creating the space where people feel free to answer those questions honestly is connection. Are you building connection with the people around you? Creating community in a way that's where you have the honesty, like almost like a radical honesty. And a lot of that requires checking your ego, especially if you ask the question in a meeting, what am I not seeing? The answer to that might dent your ego a little bit, and your reaction might be to get defensive. And I think you have to model the behavior repeatedly over time, that when people ask questions that are things are genuinely on their mind, whether you like the question or not, you have to model your response to that repeatedly over time to demonstrate and show them that you're willing to take those questions.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought process. You have to model that behavior as a leader, and when people see it, then it becomes authentic rather than just faking it, right? I want to touch on another aspect. When we talk about psychological safety, there's always a constant fear of failure. What if I fail in this one? What if I try this and if it didn't work out, right? If you constantly fear about failure, the innovation doesn't happen, right? I know you are leading the team, and when you share the story how you started your career, innovation doesn't happen without few stumbles on the way, right? Along the way. There's a saying I've always used: we don't fail fast, we learn fast, right? So you can fail multiple times, but if you're not learning anything out of the failure, then that's where the problem is, right? But if you're constantly failing and learning, that's okay. That's totally fine. Those small shift in language changed how people experimented it and how they shared ideas. From your perspective, how do you reframe mistakes as a learning opportunities instead of like punishable errors? Like a lot of people fear about that. What practices or mindset help teams see failures, right, as part of the creative process rather than something to avoid? That's a constant struggle that everyone has.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this through line that I keep coming back to is going to be about modeling behavior and how you react to these situations every time. And that's what actually creates the safety and the culture that you're looking for. But yeah, when a mistake is made, my initial reaction might be to, as a human who did something wrong, what happened? Like that you can have that natural reaction. You have to fight that and start with, what can we learn? Ask that before asking who's responsible or how did this happen? I mean, it's all about learning. It has to be learning. And I think part of that's just accepting. When I go back to when I mentioned before about having true connection, when you have connection with the people around you, you recognize that we're all just humans and we're all going to make mistakes. And when you have those genuine connections, I think you're more willing and open to seeing that and realizing it could have been your mistake too. And so I think about, there's been some situations I remember. I'm sitting in my office right now, and I can see this happening where on a number of occasions, I've had an employee come to my door and said, "Hey, I made a mistake. One of the areas I've been over is a pricing team. And when you make a mistake in pricing, that can exponentially be exponentially impactful. And I've had someone come to my door and say, I just made a mistake on pricing and we undercharged by $20,000.
Right.
And my response to that could be to get agitated and reprimand them, and it doesn't fix it, first of all. And I think that type of response is then just leading through fear. And the idea that if I don't check my response and turn it into what can we learn,
right?
And I don't think anyone means to lead through fear, but that's the default mode almost is to react in a negative fashion. But the result is you end up leading through fear. And by reprimanding without exploration of what happened, if you think that reprimanding them will lead to less mistakes in the future, I don't believe that. I think it actually can lead to more or mistakes being hidden, which then compound and become bigger mistakes. So we have at Innovative, one of our core values is actually own it. That's one of our core values. And so we specifically chose that to draw a line in the sand and say to people, hey, if you make a mistake, we want you to own it. It's okay. We're accepting of that. We want to have a conversation about it, have a healthy discussion about it, and do something before it becomes a bigger issue and compounds. And so I think as a leader, it just comes down to doing the reps. I almost relish the mistakes because it gives me an opportunity to show people it's okay. We don't like them at a base level, but we want to learn from them. So it is actually a great opportunity. And again, that's where it comes down to modeling the behavior, doing the reps, choosing to learn versus punish, and doing that enough over time is how you start to create a courageous culture.
I think that brings up as a great point, Jason. Like to me, leadership is something that people are looking for, and how you set the tone for everything is going to matter, right? In that situation that you shared, especially when it comes to courage, right? People watch how leaders are reacting to those situations, how they handle pressure, how they learn from their own mistakes and respond to when things don't go as planned. Like that's a classic example that you shared, right? I've also learned in a hard way, right? People always look at you for every answers, but you don't need to go and figure out answers for every single problem. You need to let the team figure out the answers. I learned it in a hard way. And sometimes, it takes a lot of courage to even go and admit that, hey, I thought this is going to go well, but I think, what, it's not going well. I missed the mark on it. It's not easy for a leader to go and say that in front of the team, but you have to admit some of those things because that is how you show up as a leader. And that's how you show up as what you've learned from what we are doing, right? I think that might create trust and openness openness. I think the example that you shared is a classic example. But that's hard, right? It's easy to say, but it's hard to follow. The moment you do that, people will bring ideas, people will bring feedback to you without any fear. But can you share a time where you model this kind of situation, that kind of a vulnerability, right, where being open or admitting uncertainty actually unlocked the courage in your team?
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about as you're answering there is, it's one thing to respond well to adversity by, for example, admitting that I made a mistake as a leader. That's what you should. I almost would take it back to the way I've always tried to show up. And again, this was modeled to me. Originally, I didn't even realize this is what I was experiencing, but I had a boss and a mentor who openly admitted that she surrounded herself with people who are smarter than her. Like, that was just, she said that openly. Yeah. And I always heard it, and I thought, well, we're not smarter than you, because we always kind of were deferential to her, looked up to her. But in her mind, she was openly admitting, I'm not trying to be the smartest person in the room. I'm assembling the smartest people that I can. And I think that needs to be your starting point. And so rather than just waiting until I make a mistake and be humble enough to admit it, is actually way before that.
Yeah.
Is actually just being open with people and say, I don't have all the answers. My job here is not to have all the answers. And I think going back to what I said at the very beginning, where we tend as leaders to put on masks and we create this presence, or we feel this pressure to create a presence where we're the leader, we have all the answers, we know what to do. And if you don't get to experience another way, I think you can show up and think that's how you're supposed to be. And I got the benefit of not having to do that. And so I can look at that, I can see it in other leaders now where I'm saying, you know what, it's actually, you don't have to have all the answers. I would openly admit that. My advice to you would be to openly wear that as a badge to say, yes, I'm not here to have the answers. I might have to make the ultimate decisions. Then when you turn it around, so when you say, how do you do that? I mean, it can be as simple as turning to someone and saying, what do you think we should do? I don't know the answer. What do you think we should do? And I think you do that enough. Now it feels more like a team. There's less pressure on you, and everyone's ideas tend to come, they feel more comfortable bringing their ideas to the forefront. What do you think we should do? Probably one of my number one questions. Doesn't mean I don't know what I think we should. It doesn't mean I don't know that I have an answer potential. More than likely, I have an answer, but you might have a better answer, and I'm open to that. So I'd love to give that person the opportunity to share their answer. Might make the collective answer the better, but at least they got an opportunity to voice that, think it through, present their thoughts, and then together we come up with what we think the best answer is collectively, versus me just jumping in and telling you what I think.
Right. I think that's 100% true, right? Just turn the table and ask those questions to the team members and see what is it you're getting, instead of you answering the own question, right? But Jason, like, as we look forward, right, given the rapid change in the technology, right, faster decision making that we need to constantly do, and the higher expectations from the teams, like even the high bar that we set for the teams, right? In the middle of all of that, courage becomes an important element, right? A lot of people think courage is like all about taking big risks, but it's not that, right? It's about staying true to your values, leading with empathy, creating an environment where people can just come and collaborate and fail fast and learn from it, right? I'm curious to know, what is one small practical thing that we can all start doing today to begin cultivating courage in our own teams?
Small thing. I mean, I don't think it's a small thing, but it's an important thing. A lot of what I've been talking about is, as the leader, showing up as yourself, being honest and open, and modeling that behavior. I think the other side of that is creating an environment where the other people can show up as themselves. And so to the extent that you are trying to create that within them, I think that starts with understanding who they are. So that the foundations of developing connection is, who are you? What are you interested in? Why are you here? And getting to know that person and what they help them find purpose and meaning in why they show up here every day. And starting there and then connecting that to what we're trying to do as a business. That's how you build real connection. And so not only are you modeling it, but you're modeling to them that we care about why they're showing up and that we want them to feel like they're contributing to something that is meaningful to them, versus just showing up and collecting a paycheck. It sounds small. It's not a small thing, but I think it's incredibly impactful when you can connect what you're trying to do as an organization back to what they're trying to do as an individual, and that you pay attention to them as an individual person.
Well said, Jason. Like, I'm sure I'm going to probably listen to this episode multiple times. There's a lot of experience that you have shared. I wish I can just be a listener rather than just be part of the podcast. Like, it's really interesting to hear someone who went through this journey. And like I said, I learned some of the things in a hard way. I'm still learning, right? I'm sure every leader in the space is learning as well. And again, Jason, thank you so much for taking time to be part of the podcast. And I reached out to you through one of our common friend. It was grateful for me to have you as part of the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.